Agreed.
Okay. So cost of care, I'm not sure what we as researchers and clinicians can do about this, but it's a hot topic. Vincent Rajkumar debated it at ASCO. It was presented here by Jean-Luc Harasso with a European perspective. And so the average cost of a new drug is obviously really high, $150,000. I mean, there's a huge cost. The other thing that Vincent has emphasized is that in recent years there have been astronomical increases in costs for no apparent reason. And this rapidly rising yellow line is the cost of insulin, which has obviously been around for a long time. And so the cost of drugs, not just cancer drugs, is really out of control. And it's just hard to know what the future holds for that. But clearly, the costs are more than the system can bear. We do know that. And so at the patient level, it's all about access. I mean, the costs are limiting access, especially outside of the U.S., I would say, varying by country. There are very many different systems globally for this. And what are we going to do about this? What are the ways to improve access? Despite extensive discussion, do we look at patent laws? Do we look at how we handle generics? Do we have trials to support access? And certainly we're doing that around the world, is to try to enhance trial availability of drugs that are not approved. What do we do? And so I don't know what you would suggest. What as doctors are the most important things that we should advocate for, to try to help with this cost problem?
Well, I mean, I think the first step is just understanding a little bit of what you just shared. I think so often I wouldn't say we bury our heads in the sand, but we just say, oh, the evidence shows that this drug combination is the best. I don't really care about the cost, and we just go ahead with it. And we've done this throughout medicine, not just in oncology or in myeloma. So I think it's incumbent on us as physicians to be a little bit more aware of the bigger picture, and then of my individual patient sitting in front of me. After all this was raised the last few years, I'm very careful now. I ask every one of my patients, what is your copay for the drugs that you're receiving from me? And it's huge variation. We have systems that try and help, and organizations and foundations that contribute money. But by September, it's pretty well all gone, it seems. So a lot of our patients carry a lot of burden.
But in that realm, I think it's important that if you have a patient who's on a combination, and the combined co-pays are becoming substantial.
Yeah. So I have a lot of patients, for example, who are both, not to pick on these drugs, but let's say they're on ixazomib and lenalidomide.
Yes.
And they'll say to me, doc, it's really hard to get both together. My copay for each of them is $400, $500. I can't do both. I can only do one. So I think the first step is us being aware of the issue to deal with our individual patient. And then, as you've mentioned, I think, Brian, we have to advocate at a higher level.
Yes.
I mean, this is why we have these debates, why we have these discussions, why Jean-Luc has been so active within Europe and some of us in the U.S. and other places trying to advocate for this, so that there isn't an uncontrolled rise in these drugs, that there has to be rationale. We have to look at the value of the drug and not just the fact that it happens to be approved by the FDA.
And one thing that Jean-Luc suggested is that we come together and create some criteria of value, and instead of delegating that by default to others, we should decisively assess the value as we see it.
Right. Yeah, I mean, and some of that will involve designing the trials. So there are different types of trials that are designed. One may be purely for the sake of registration and access, but others may be more for the how do you actually incorporate this into your daily practice.
Yes.
And I think it's important to realize that with almost every drug we've used, we've taken a few years afterwards to figure out where does it really fit into our practice, and what's the right dose and schedule to give that may be very different from the original registration.
And so we don't have a trial for that, right?
That's right. That's right. Yeah.
And so, this was something, and also something emphasized by Vincent, is that to be thinking about that ahead of time, and Philippe Moreau from France brought that up.
Right.
In thinking about the trial design, is looking more at that practical level, as well as the approval. You need to get the drug approved, but you need that information to guide the subsequent therapy.
Right.
And also the reimbursement.
Right. And I do think it's important not to sort of, because one of the things that tends to happen when you have these cost-type discussions discussions is that our colleagues in industry are sort of demonized for what they're doing.
Yeah.
And the reality is that they are at the table with us, particularly in myeloma, helping us to get these new drugs, these new innovations forward. And you can't get that for nothing. There has to be some sort of a trade-off. And so understanding what's mutually beneficial for everybody is part of the solution.
And at the summit, we did have the pharma representatives at the table. There was a round table. Well, it was actually a bit oblong, but anyway, they were at the table, and they were willing to discuss and be part of the discussion, which is a difficult and complicated discussion. But being at the table, very important.
Yes.
And I think one other thing I would add is it really is incumbent on us when we make conclusions based on prior trials that about treating patients. For example, this idea that everybody needs treatment forever. We have to make sure that we look at that also in the vein of cost. You know, we think of long-term toxicity of these drugs. Oh, can it cause chronic diarrhea? Can it cause another cancer? Well, it can also cause what I call wallet toxicity, right? I mean, it can affect the patient. And so that's why I think our MRD discussion was interesting earlier, that, you know, if we end up having, you know, at least a small cadre of patients, and maybe a larger cadre with time, who reach a certain depth of response, we may be able to stop treatment. And paradoxically, that can actually affect costs, of course, because they don't need to be on a drug that costs $10,000 or $20,000 a month indefinitely for many years.
Yeah, so this depth of the response, the MRD testing has a lot of advantages. It could allow us to limit the therapy. It can shorten the length of the trials. It can speed up drug approval. And so I think that a lot can come from that, including impact on cost.